The curls are gonna start.
Ashley, we good? We good to start?
Yeah.
Okay.
5, 4,
Everybody good?
3,
Oh, jeez. Yeah.
5, 4, 3.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the specially called workshop meeting for Friday, September 27th. Ms. Hilbert, will you please call roll?
Yes, sir. Councilman De La Garza?
I am present.
Councilman Kidder?
Here.
Councilwoman Butler?
Present.
Councilwoman Scott? Here. Mayor Pro Tem Young? Councilman Lofgren?
Here.
And Mayor Crocker.
Here. If you would, please rise, join me for the pledges, followed by a moment of silence. Thank you. Welcome again, everyone. We have a busy agenda for the afternoon, so we'll jump straight into it. Mr. Garza, do you have any announcements or reminders for us?
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. We certainly do have really good items for conversation and discussion this afternoon. My only reminder is we do have a regular City Council meeting coming up on Tuesday, October 1st. This, of course, also coincides with National Night Out. We have intentionally kept that agenda short to give you and staff an opportunity to make all the different community and neighborhood events that will be taking place that evening. We will be providing you with a list of all of the events that have registered with our police department for that evening so that you can have that as a resource for that evening. And so please expect to receive that via email by the end of the day today. And that's all I have.
Any public and employee recognitions?
No, sir.
All right. Items from council, anyone? And I have no cards for citizen communications, so we will jump straight into our meeting. Item C1, city manager reports.
I'll do it. I got this. It's okay. All right. We're all thrown off because it's a workshop in council chambers. In any case, so first up, we'll provide you, as we normally do at every quarterly workshop, a CIP update, and of course, this will be spearhead by David Sheblack. David?
Good afternoon. My intention today is to give you an update on the fiscal year 2025 projects as part of the capital improvements program. The projects, we presented projects to you, to council back in May. And basically, council gave us guidance to go ahead with those programs, those particular projects. And Avery Flessner and I have sat down and tried to determine an approximate letting schedule for these projects to give you some idea of when they would come out for bid, when the possible construction would be beginning. On the handout that you were given, the first several projects are more in terms of engineering design and/or right-of-way acquisition, but these do require us to go out and request proposals from various engineers and other firms for right-of-way acquisition. We've got a project, water line replacement on Sycamore and Willow Street. We look to contract an engineer in the third quarter fiscal year 25. Mockingbird sanitary sewer line replacement. Same, second or third quarter of fiscal year 25. Airline Road sanitary sewer line. This is right now over by Airline and Laurent. There's sewer lines are in the backyard easements. What we're planning on doing is abandoning those and relocating the sewer mains to the front in the street where they're accessible by city crews. This will require some replumbing on the lots, so we'll have to work with the lot owners, the property owners, to get a temporary construction easement so we can reroute these service lines on that. Then the next three, Magruder Drive, Lingo Lane, and Wagner Way Street. All of those pretty much are going to be combined, could be associated with each other. We are looking at second quarter of fiscal year 25 to request engineering proposals on that, if all goes as we expect or hope. Regional wastewater plant, this is the design for a influent screen at the headworks of the plant. We will be sending out RFQs on that beginning October, November, first quarter. Street construction projects. Our residential street construction maintenance program, we are hoping to advertise this for bids in the first quarter. Some of this is going to depend, right now, we are waiting on the results of our annual street assessment from Flood Ace. We've contracted with them. They're scheduled, they should be beginning work next week to come out and do the cores on the individual streets that we've identified. And once we get those reports from them, then we can develop our scope of work on the individual streets and let that out for bid for contractors. Should be able to get started construction on that shortly after the first of the calendar year. Bon Air Street reconstruction. Currently, we are working on the utilities on the western side of the Bon Air subdivision. Once the western portion west of, I think it's Azalea, is completed, we'll be ready. We have to, once we get the street design drawings from our consulting engineer, we will be ready to advertise for bids for that portion to start the street construction next year. Anticipating a start of construction maybe third quarter of next year, of fiscal year 25. Vine Street reconstruction project. This was a project that had initially been included as part of fiscal year 24, but with some other street projects that had a increased, I'm drawing a blank on the word, but imperativeness to construct, such as Pleasant Green between Juan Lynn and Pawaka Highway. This one got moved back to fiscal year 25. So we will be able to reconstruct Vine Street from Red River all the way to Mockingbird. We should be able to advertise this for bids in the second quarter, and would start construction in the summer. Late spring, early summer of next calendar year. Then we've got several mill and overlay projects. Ben Wilson Street from Houston Highway to Rio Grande, Ben Jordan Street from Sam Houston to Loop 463. I'll discuss Millette Drive just separately in a little bit. Huvar from Navarro to Dairy, John Stockbauer from Salem to Mockingbird, Delmar Drive from North Street to Pleasant Green, Odom Street from Laurent to Port Lavaca Highway. We anticipate grouping all of those, since they're same type of work, into one bid project. With the larger project, we expect to get better bid prices, possibly even more bidders. It's hard to say. We will be definitely advertising, contacting contractors that we know do that type of work. Millette Drive from Briggs to Ball Airport. There's been discussion with this on this project because council's aware that TxDOT is going to rebuild the bridge on Briggs Boulevard over Spring Creek. While that section of road is closed down beginning probably next summer for approximately a year, we're looking to do mill and overlay Millette right now from Briggs all the way to Ball Airport. But we thought it might be a good time to go ahead and mill and overlay Millette all the way from Loop 463 to Ball Airport. Do that prior to the start of construction on the Briggs Boulevard Bridge. We're going to see an increased traffic load on that section of Millette with Briggs being closed. Having that road a new overlay put on that section of Millette. Should be able to handle that traffic load much better. We're also looking at the addition of some right turn lanes. One of those at Loop 463 to be able to turn right onto the frontage road. Another one at Briggs Boulevard so that you turn right going west on Briggs Boulevard. And one also at Ball Airport Road, which would help with the traffic flow to the elementary school there. Instead of having people just back up on Ball Airport Road waiting to turn right, you'd allow people to come in and be able to turn left and go south on Millette. Utility projects.
David, real quick, I'll interrupt you for a second, give you a chance to drink some water if you want it. But really quickly, one of the things that, and I apologize if you were going to mention this at the end, but I think it's relevant to mention it now. All of these street projects, especially the ones that are impacting residents and neighborhoods, we want to be better at communicating with them about what we're doing, when we're doing it, who's doing it, things of that sort. I had a really good email exchange with Councilwoman Butler about this related to the project on Millette and Briggs. And Ashley and her team have already spoken with our engineering department to just better strategize on that communication strategy, especially in that area of town where, as you heard David mention, they'll be impacted by close to a year just with the construction of the bridge. We want to make sure that we're getting ahead of that as much as possible to educate the residents that would be impacted by that construction. And so just know that we're being more intentional and attempting to be more proactive with some of our communication strategies and specifically more grassroots, if you will, with putting out flyers door to door, things of that sort, just anything that could really help communicate to the general public that would be impacted. So just wanted to share that.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you. Utility projects proposed for fiscal year '25. Avenue D is a sewer line rehabilitation. This was identified through the SSES study that was done by RJN. And this is one of the projects. We also had proposed to rebuild that street, but prior to that, we want to go ahead and do that rehabilitation on that sewer line. This goes from Juan Lynn to Power Street, and also one block west on Power Street. And it's a rehabilitation project with rehabilitation of the sewer line with the CIPP, as well as rehabilitation of the manholes along that stretch. Anthony Road sewer line replacement, we have contracted with Urban Engineers to do a design. They have presented us with preliminary design for city staff to review. We've made comments, returned that back to them. They should be able to making those changes to those drawings, those plans, and then provide them back to us where we should be able to advertise this project for bids in the second quarter fiscal year '25. Northeast Street waterline replacement, another contract that has been given to an outside engineer, Ardura, out of San Antonio. They are designing this. We've had discussions on alignment on this. They're working, haven't seen actual preliminaries from them yet, but right now, as far as timeline, we should be able to receive final design plans for that second quarter also. Dairy Road waterline abandonment, that is going to be an in-house design. It's strictly, right now, there's two 16-inch water lines running from Dairy Road to John Stockbauer across, I forget the name of that commercial subdivision, but over there where it used to be Halipaskis, now it's, what is it, Sweet
Fountains.
Sweet Fountains, okay. That's just Halipaskis to me, I'm sorry. And we're going to abandon one of those sewer lines, make sure all the services are, one of the water lines, make sure all the services are tied over to the active line. That way there's not two lines to maintain and keep up with and for any maintenance, leak repairs, that sort of thing. We will continue with the water meter replacement program, advertising for bids for water meters. Citywide street lighting, LED lighting project. Avery, help me out on this one. AEP is complete with their section. We're working with VEC right now? Okay. AEP has done all their upgrades on their portion of the power system, electric system within City of Victoria. Right now is Victoria Electric Co-op. Those areas that they're making change outs or will be making change outs of the overhead security lights, street lights to LED lighting fixtures. Building and facility remodel, pre-design for City Hall, 700 Main. Once the public safety building is complete, PD, fire, municipal court move over there. It is intention to do some remodeling here, move some of the city departments closer to City Hall. And then once that is done, do some remodeling on 700 Main to better utilize the available space that is there. I know this says Q1. I don't know that that's going to be quite that early.
That's what we're aiming for.
That's what we're aiming for, yes. The citywide ERP software project, that is a project where we're replacing the current city software, Wesley?
County system.
Counting system is, my understanding is that
We're really testing you today.
you are testing me on this one, and I'm just drawing a blank on the terminology here, and I know the word,
End of life.
but we're, do what?
Gilbert can take it.
SAP is becoming end of life. It's coming about another year from now, and they have gone out for RFQs or ready to evaluate, and they should be coming back with a recommendation to the city manager and present to council sometime in the first or second quarter.
The word I was looking for was support, which is basically the end of life. If they're no longer going to support it, there's the end of life on the software. So yes. Then there's 3 CDBG Mint projects. The city has applications in right now for these 3 projects. Lone Tree Acres Street Drainage Project, which is a major outfall along the Lone Tree Acres subdivision, as well as reconstruction of streets within that subdivision. Water and wastewater SCADA systems, which a SCADA system is a supervisory control and data acquisition system, which allows city personnel to monitor the various, so let's say the water system, for instance. They can monitor the activity of whether a pump is running, whether it's a call for the pump, but it's not running. They can monitor the levels in the elevated storage tanks to monitor pressure throughout different parts of town. Similar to that on the wastewater, they can monitor and determine whether the levels within a wet well of a lift station, whether a pump should be running, is it running, how many pumps are running, these things. These are qualify under the MIT project because as a hardening of your system during a major storm event or something, the conditions of your utility system can be monitored from one location without having to send people out into the elements to verify and check on these situations at these locations.
Just to add to that, David, council, currently we're having a lot of discussion with GLO folks who really approves the project. So that's still moving forward, but sometimes in the latter part of December, we should know more about it. So it's not like, nothing's happening. There's a lot of conversation going, and they still want some more data, stuff like that.
This is why this is to be determined. It's all in their hands now. We've been providing them with the information. They ask questions. We give them more information as they come back with more requests for information. It will get funded. I don't see any reason these projects are eligible. It's just a matter of satisfying the GLO bureaucrats. So.
Nice words.
Yeah. So real quick, I'll give you another water break if you want to take it. So for context, especially for our 2 new council members, at every one of our quarterly workshops, we typically do provide a CIP-centric update. And of course, this being our first workshop in fiscal year '25, this is why the intent of this is to share with you this is how we plan to tackle the CIP that's in the budget for fiscal year '25. You'll realize that when we get to the December workshop, that not everything goes as planned. There are things that end up costing more than what we thought, or we have to shift focus. You know, David mentioned that we've hired a firm to do some soil testing on the streets that we're envisioning doing certain type of work. Sometimes, not often, but sometimes that study comes back and says, you know what, you have it scheduled for a seal coat, but that subbase is too beat up. We don't recommend spending the money for a seal coat that needs to be completely reconstructed. So then we have to go back to the drawing board to figure out where we fit that in, where we might get some money, you know, et cetera. And so, so today is really to provide you a baseline of what our goals are, but expect that at every quarterly workshop, there'll be some conversation about potential adjustments. And I think that's a really, really good way for us to be transparent, hold ourselves accountable with, obviously, with the budget that you approved, while at the same time being transparent about any possible changes. Once we get to the December workshop, it starts to be, as I'll mention later on in today's workshop, it starts to be more of a mixture of, okay, this is the status of fiscal year '25 projects. Now here's some projects that we're looking at trying to add for fiscal year '26. And sometimes when projects, let's say there is a street project that needs to go from a seal coat to a complete reconstruct, well, there may not be money to reconstruct it in fiscal year '25. So now all of a sudden that project might be added in fiscal year '26. And so over time, we get into the cycle of having combined conversations around status of current projects, while at the same time talking about future projects to add to the CIP. And I know that it sounds like a lot, but it is a lot, which is a good thing. But, you know, in time, you know, I'm hopeful that, you know, for the general public that's been tuning in and others that may be new to the conversation, some of this stuff will become, you know, second nature, especially when we're talking about mill and overlays, utility projects, things of that sort. But if you have any questions, please feel free to interject. I know David has just flown through this, but we really want to make sure that you're understanding of what we're doing, when we're doing it, why we're doing it. So please feel free to ask any questions as we go through this.
Yes, feel free to ask questions. Anytime
Okay.
through this. Okay, go ahead.
Just out of curiosity and because I perhaps missed your explanation of it, when we talk about the residential.
Can you speak into the microphone a little better?
When we talk about the residential street maintenance program and the testing that's going to happen, do you already have a list of streets that will be tested? And where could we find that if that is a
Yes.
list that's available?
We do have a list of those streets. In fact, if you go to item 2 on this agenda, we're listing the streets that we are looking to have tested.
David, can
on
you speak
page
a little
3?
more into the mic as well?
On page 3, the 2025 Street Condition Report has a listing of the streets that we're looking to have tested, that we are going to have tested. 'Cause these are on our, not only are they on the residential street maintenance program, some of these streets are part of the mill and overlay. We want to ascertain and verify that the asphalt thickness is sufficient to mill to the depth that we are proposing to do.
And Councilman Butler, when we put together the CIP, the streets that are part of the residential street program, those are but I guess in a way they're predetermined, they're pre-selected. When council approves these 3-year CIPs, you're in essence already approving list of streets for those particular years. And so these lists of streets, for example, that are in the 2025 residential street program, they've been listed as a 2025 residential street program street for, 3 years now? 4 years now? And so that's also why it's important to do these soil condition tests, because a lot could have changed, in that 4-year period from when that street first made the list. Maybe it was okay to receive a seal coat 4 years ago when it made the seal coat list, but stuff happens, could have deteriorated significantly in the last 4 years, and that's why we get into the habit of doing that testing. Later, David will speak a little bit about the CIP book. Mm-hmm. That book will have the list of residential streets for the years, for the upcoming years. And so that'll be a really good opportunity as well to find the list. Ultimately, all of this information is on our website. So to your comment or question about where you can find the information, it's all available on our website. It's available on the engineering page. Of course, it's accessible through the adopted budget link as well. And we'll make it a point as we start tackling these projects to put out, the adequate press releases as well. But the information is certainly accessible for anybody that might ask or reach out about it.
Thank you.
On to page 4. As Jesus mentioned earlier, in December, we plan to come to you with any potential amendments or revisions that we need to make to the 2025 CIP plan, based upon conditions that we've become aware of between now and then. We also are planning on updating the cost estimates using more current cost data. Some of the project costs we're using were first determined or developed 2 to 3 years ago. We've seen significant cost increases in construction since that time, so we'd like to know what we may be facing when we get into when we're ready to bid these projects. I think if you can, let's use Tanglewood Streets, for example. Initially, we were working with a budget of around $5 million. The bids came in over $7 million. We expected them to be that high as we got closer to bid date, just using more current data. So working with finance department, with the CFO, they had to work their magic and find some extra funds so we could complete those projects.
And sprinkle dust.
Also, delivery of the CIP book. It is our intention to be able to have these ready to hand out to you at our meeting next Tuesday, October 1, for you to take with you, peruse it, provide any comments on it, ask any questions that it may generate. But we won't expect anything from you that night. We want to give you time to look at it and study it for a while. I've also been asked to provide some parks project updates. Some of these aren't necessarily as part of the CIP, but they are ongoing parks projects. Ethel Lee Tracy bathroom. This project consists of a new restroom that's going to be constructed near the children's playground and splash pad over by the basketball tennis courts area. A firm has been contracted. We've done some geotechnical work to determine what type of foundation is necessary, sub-preparation is necessary. This actual restroom, it comes in as a prefab unit, comes in on a trailer. They lift it off the trailer, they set it on a prepared pad, slab. They plumb it up, and it's good to go.
He made that sound way too easy.
Yeah, it's not that easy.
You're right.
And I question it too in a way because it's a solid building, because I thought it'd be like a little, okay, I'll put a little.
We already bought it. Don't question it.
Well, but there was some due diligence done on it to make sure it's not gonna blow away with 20 miles an hour, okay? So,
It's a
anyway.
masonry building.
But maybe
Comes
25.
in on a 4-inch thick slab that they can lift off the truck and they can set down on prepared pad, limestone, compacted limestone pad. As part of that project, we are also going to construct some sidewalk that will connect from the sidewalk at the splash pad over to the playground. Pine Street Park. Currently, the park staff is conferring with some buy-board equipment vendors as far as playground equipment for replacement at the Pine Street Park. Once they've selected the equipment that they want and the layout that they would like to see, then the park staff will be looking to provide an update on the final concept to council during one of the council meetings in November. Bronson Park, excuse me. Playground equipment has been set in place. This project consists of a replacement of the playground equipment at the Bronson Park. We still need to complete fencing, landscaping, some site grading work. We are scheduled right now to complete the project and have a ribbon cutting, maybe early November, end of October, early November. Children's Park splash pad. This is at Riverside Park, the Children's Park. This is across the street from the actual Children's Park playground and the pavilion, where right now it's called Elder Field, like a Little League field there, baseball field. That is where the splash pad is going to be constructed. Earlier this year, we put out for an RFQ, request for qualifications from firms that can do for parks and recreation facilities. We've got an established pool of firms that are qualified to do that design. We will select one and ask them for an actual proposal to do the design for that project. Once we get that, then we'll give them, contract with them to begin that design.
And just to clarify, that splash pad, the field that he's referring to will not be impacted by this. So I just want to clarify that. So the splash pad and the playground would, in essence, fit into the area where the children's playground is now. It might consume a little bit of some of the green space that's off to the side of it. We can't necessarily alter too much of that space. But the field that David just mentioned will not be impacted by this. So I just want to clarify that.
Good, thank you.
Thank you. Riverside Boat Ramp and Kayak Takeout. Currently, the city has been awarded a planning grant from Texas Parks and Wildlife to design improvements to the boat ramp and to determine and design determine a location and design a kayak takeout point along the Guadalupe Riverbank. We are preparing an RFQ to be advertised to be published in early November to receive the qualifications and score them in December to hopefully contract with the firm second quarter of fiscal year 25, early January. That's really all I've got right now. As far as this, are there any questions regarding anything regarding the capital improvements program?
Not that. I did have a question. In the past, and years ago, we did street grading, and it was largely done with interns and looking at streets and based upon a certain criteria. And a few years back, we switched over to a more scientific method with the street mapping and getting a grading, which gave us information. If you can maybe remind me, how long ago has that been? And do we have ongoing efforts to continuously upgrade street grading so that we know how to properly plan for future CIPs?
So that, Ken, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that was 2020, I believe.
Yes.
And so you're right. We had this Zamboni, I always called it the Zamboni looking machine, that would drive around analyzing the streets. We have discussed how best to utilize that data moving forward, and we have discussed the pros and cons of when is the right time to potentially have reassessment done, to that degree. Because back then, if you would have asked us back then, we would have said, I probably would have said, every 5 years, let's do that. However, there's so many streets that, necessitate work that I think what that study accomplished was a significant mind shift in how we were viewing streets, not necessarily centered around the data, but centered around the application that's utilized for a specific type of street. And so I think the big takeaway from that exercise was, think about mill and overlays. We really weren't doing mill and overlays prior to 5 years ago to the extent that we are now. We're doing reclamation work. We weren't really doing much of that, or it had been a while, I should say, that we had done that. So the way that we're, I guess, keeping up with it is really more how do we leverage the data with some common sense, practical components? Because we want, that study isn't looking at, vehicular traffic. That study isn't looking at what's around that street. And so we've tried to find the balance between using the data with some realistic approaches to what's practical based off of other factors that we think matter, such as vehicular traffic counts, what's around the street, is it a school, is it a park? I mean, what is sort of around that? And then what's also practical financially speaking, because I could tell you that the study showed that there are some areas of town that they just need to be completely reconstructed, but the infrastructure just costs prohibitive. And, think of, we applied for about a $60 million grant, a couple years ago to replace drainage, curbs, streets, et cetera, in a particular part of town, because it's cost prohibitive to come up with $60 million, to fix that area of town, right? And so it was using the data, matching it with financial restraints, matching it with some common sense approach like vehicular traffic and things like that. I don't know if Gilbert, you want to add anything?
No, I was going to add, we've been having discussions, David and the crew. Why not use the same data that Mr. Garza was talking about and do more internal ownership on it and updating it and move the data around so we keep an inventory now. In the past, we never kept the inventory. What streets been done, went to what time. So that is what in discussion right now. How can we capitalize on that data? At the same time, update that data and store it, create another data within that data to keep count of what the streets are doing and what should be coming next. So I think we did get a start 5 years ago. Now the whole principle around is to how can we capitalize and improve that internally without costing any more excess cost to it. And David and I have been having some talk about that too as well.
Yeah, no, I just want to make sure that we still had that one arm or, having the data. I mean, certainly you need to know usage and vehicular traffic and money is probably the biggest issue of them all. But I just want to make sure that we're continuing on that path of still having the scientific kind of the data points as one part of our decision-making process.
Definitely one part of it for sure, yeah.
And I just want to add, I know we've had a couple of opportunities that we've taken advantage of over the last couple of years. Mr. Garza mentioned the reclamations, that we were able to get some improvements done on streets that may not get caught up in larger subdivision projects. And I think that's a great way to address those, and want to just re-encourage you guys to stay diligent on looking for those opportunities, because when they pop up, I think they can make a big difference for our residents that are on some of these smaller streets that need some work. So keep up the good work there.
Thank you.
Anybody else? All right, thank you.
Great, thank you, David. Okay, well, I'll just keep it going, Mayor, if that's all right with you.
Absolutely.
Okay, so next up, we're going to talk about the Community Center Master Plan. This is a process that formally began in November of last year for us, and so I know that was pre a couple of our council members. And we hired a company called Populous, engaged with Todd Gralla, he'll come up here in a second, who's a principal with Populous. But before he comes up to share with you what the process was and share the results and of the Community Center Master Plan, I want to give a public shout to the individuals that served on a committee, basically a stakeholder master plan committee that helped drive that process and met regularly with the consultants and with staff. And they included former Councilwoman Josephine Solis, the chair of the Parks Commission, Lori Eder, our chair of our Tourism Advisory Board, Sue, I'm horrible with last names, Sue Prudhomme, from the Victoria Stock Show, Farm and Ranch Show, Gary Loist, who's general chair. From the Victoria Stock Show, we had Kirby Garrett and Shelley Marbach. From the Farm and Ranch Show, we also had Victor Eder. And from Comic-Con, we had Brian Hans. We tried to be very intentional with diversifying who was part of the group, representing different types of events that take place at the community center. We, of course, had our own staff, Jody Miller from the community center. At the time, our sports tourism manager, Alex Agüero, of course, Mike Etienne, and other staff from other departments, such as economic development, Daniel Williams, Joe Novosad from CVB. All of these folks really got together to really talk through all the different issues of the facility, which you'll learn about some tonight. So I just wanted to give them a public shout and thank them for their involvement with the process. And so with that, I'll ask Todd to come up and walk you through the Community Center Master Plan. Todd, yep.
Good afternoon, welcome back.
Thank you, Jesus. Mayor, good to see you. Thank you all for having me here today. I'll give you a quick rundown, one maybe not so quick rundown of the master plan, because there's quite a bit of information here. A little bit about myself and the firm, in case you don't know. Populous, we're a large architectural firm based in Kansas City. However, we also have offices in Houston and Dallas here in Texas. I've done a lot of work in Texas on similar facilities at Waco for the Heart of Texas Fair, over in Taylor for Williamson County Expo, as well as Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo, and about 300 similar facilities around the country. So it's a subject matter area we know quite well. We've also worked with Jesus down in Kingsville prior to him coming here to Victoria, which I love your town. It's a really cool town. So I'm going to jump into the master plan process. We officially began this back on the 28th of January with our first workshop. That's where we had a committee formed and first brought in to start giving input and doing a walking tour of the facility and understanding the grounds and assets that we have to work with. We also set forth a strategy at that first workshop that we would have a series of public engagements that I'll talk a little bit about, as well as some public surveying that I'll talk a little bit about as we go forward here. So what I'll talk about today is a site analysis, our existing assets, that workshop and outreach, what we think are the appropriate new project components, as well as renovations. And then specifically, I'm going to go into a little bit of detail on the community center building itself and a potential new arena component. And then a little bit on project budgets moving forward. I don't expect you to read all this. I think that Jesus will probably give you a hard copy of this so you can. I'm going to give you a Cliff Notes version as we go forward. But so we kind of start from very big picture, assessing kind of where a facility lies in a community. Of course, you guys all know where it is, over to the southeast of downtown. We also tour around the community to understand other assets, particularly recreation that you have in the community, and kind of what the expectations of your stakeholders and taxpayers are. So we can understand kind of how we need to go about establishing goals for a facility like this. So what we were specifically hired to look at is the 68 acres that comprises the adult softball fields, the expo, or the community center, and then the area to the east, which also is really more outdoor recreation right now. There's a couple of soccer fields there, as well as the skate park. So this 68 acres was really the focus of our effort. You know, we start looking at where are people coming from, so we can understand how people are approaching the site, and what visual impacts look like, how entries need to perform, where large vehicles versus cars are coming from, and so on. We look at what our utility assets are, where utilities coming from, may affect where we propose putting buildings on a site, or whether site utilities need to be upgraded. Oh, sorry, skipped. We look at things like topography and drainage. Another very important aspect, your site here is really quite flat. It does have a couple of significant drainage structures that go through it and along the southern edge of it, which I'll talk a little bit about further into the presentation. And then, of course, the existing assets, and as I mentioned, the main existing assets are the adult softball field complex to the northwest, the core facilities, which are the civic or the community center, as well as the livestock barn, and then the outdoor recreation spaces to the southeast. And we kind of broke this up into kind of some planning zones, the way we think about using property. There's recreation and playing fields to the west and to the east, and then in that core, we've got the event and expo and equestrian and rodeo venues. So looking at the existing facilities, you've got about 90,000 square feet in your existing community center, that core contiguous building. The facilities are well-maintained, however, they are aging. As you can tell by some of the photos, they're limited in the capacity of how they can perform because of the way they're designed, as well as their age and their facilities such as technology, finishes, whether they're heated and cooled or not, plays a big role in that. So we looked at everything from food service to finishes to how people park and how the buildings look on the inside and outside. This is your existing facility floor plan. And then in our analysis, we really identified some key things. On the annex side, which is this side right here in the blue, this is a pretty nice facility. It's subdivisible into 4 different spaces for if you want to have a very large event or break it down into small events. It's very flexible. It does have some challenges. It has food service adjacent to it. However, some of these, it has limited capacity, cooking capacity. It's older. It has air walls in it. However, they're not great acoustic barriers, so it's really not ideal for having multiple events. We could improve upon that. The HVAC system is loud. It would be good to have a little bit better technology in there. But overall, it's a pretty nice facility and it's heavily utilized. The core entry is really where all of the guests for this facility enter and exit the building. So if there's an event occurring in the annex side, there's an event occurring in the dome and an event occurring in the arena, it's the prerogative of most visitors to try to enter through that main entry. And that makes it very challenging to hold 2 or 3 events, which the building is very possible of because of its spaces that it has. But with everyone trying to crowd through that main entry is very difficult because everyone's basically trying to come in these doors, go across to the annex, go into the dome, or go into the arena. We also have some food service here that has queuing lines into that circulation space. All of our bathrooms right now, or most of them, are in this core. So there are some challenges there related to moving people around and effectively hosting multiple events. And that was very clearly expressed to us in some of the public meetings. The Dome is a very cool building, very unique, obviously, in its round shape. Had some great opportunities, I think, architecturally to improve that space, improve technology. It does have chilled air right now, however, it's not heated. So it really needs to be both heated and air conditioned to get the most use out of it. It does have a small kitchen, which is great to be able to cater in for events like quinceaneras, wedding receptions. And it has a stage. The stage causes some trouble for events. So if there is a party occurring in this space and there's a band, there's a lot of sound bleed over that occurs into the arena. So some people don't want to use the arena while there's a party with the band in the Dome. So we realized that that's a limitation. So we looked at some options for that. And then we have the management offices over on the far right, which are really not big enough. They're hard to see and identify as the offices when a visitor or a potential renter pulls up to the facility to do business, and we think that needs to be improved as well. The arena is a nice pre-engineered building. It really does not meet the specifications or requirements for what it was originally designed to do today in today's world. It's very narrow. It's 90 feet wide. Normally, to host rodeo and livestock events, we would design an arena to be at a very bare minimum 120 feet wide. So we're a good 50 feet short. Its height is also a limitation of that building. The highest point in the building, or the height at the building at the edge, is 20 feet. Ideally, that would be greater than 25 feet with a ridge of 30, 35 or higher. So it does have some height limitations. And it has some also seating and circulation limitations as well. So we took that into consideration as we move forward with trying to come up with some ideas of how to repurpose some of these facilities. So as I mentioned, we did a series of workshops and outreach, as well as surveys. During the process, we had 3 public meetings, which the public were invited to come kind of see our progress, give input, ask questions. Those were well attended, especially the last one that we held about 8 weeks ago. We had a great turnout. We also did some surveying, and I have a bit of the survey result here that we can talk about. We were pleasantly surprised. We had almost 900 full responses to that. Typically in a community this size, we would see less than half that number. So the participation was very good. We appreciate that. Not surprisingly, when we asked some of the questions such as, what's your favorite event at the community center? Not surprisingly, one thing that ranked very high was the livestock show. That's one of your biggest events that occurs out there annually. But also concerts and entertainment, and then festivals and outdoor shows. Given that we don't have a lot of indoor space, that's not surprising. When we ask about, youth, family, adult events, the bulk of event participation is family events, sort of expected. And then also we were asking, what would you like to see offered at the community center moving forward? And the big ones there are really 2 big ones. One is livestock show and rodeo, equestrian, and the other is concerts. And then kind of a third follow-up was conventions or business events. And then the rest of the pack of event types was really pretty modest and across the board. We asked the question, do you think that new facilities or renovated facilities will better serve the users? That was an overwhelming yes, as you can see in that pie chart. We had about 94% yes. And then we were also asking specific areas. What are specific areas of the facilities that need improvements? The dome, of course, the arena. The arena that was the big one, and you'll see a little bit of repeat of that word arena as it relates to new facilities and renovation as we go through this. But the arena was the big one. The carnival grounds were also important. And this helps us kind of guide our kind of planning principles and what we think needs to be achieved here, right? And then when we also asked the survey system to kind of kick back what were some key words that people actually wrote into some of the questions. And it's interesting that one word that really repeated a lot was the word arena, as you can see over on the right. Neat arena, bigger arena, rodeo arena, indoor arena. So there's something there, right? And then we also did do a little bit of look at the adult softball field complex in terms of what improvements need to be there, and I'll show a little bit of that as we go through this. But it's my understanding that there's also Half Associates is doing a little bit deeper dive into the softball field area.
Yeah, and I'll talk a little bit about that after this presentation.
Okay. So I'm going to jump on into what we recommend as the master plan. Again, don't read it. I'm going to go through this in pretty good detail. Some of what we did was we did want to develop some renderings and architectural concepts as part of this, just so people could have a visual of the scale of what we're talking about. So we kind of, look for inspiration in the area, in the region for what some of that might look like, and you'll see this referenced in some of the concept renderings I show you. And we also, as we kind of went through and understood what the surveys were telling us about event space, concert space, arenas, we pulled a couple of similar projects that we kind of use as precedents as we move forward with the group, with the committee. And those 2 are both here in Texas. One is the base in Waco, Texas. It's a multi-use event center that was opened a few years ago. And then the other one is the Williamson County Expo, where they have a covered event arena and some other support facilities, barns, RV hookups, and so on. We felt that those two projects, regional projects, were very similar possibly to where we might head here. So I'll go through this in some pretty good detail because there are a lot of subtle things in this master plan you probably won't notice. One, for example, is the realignment of the main entry into the complex. It's not a huge deal, but it's a very subtle change that is sort of important because right now the main entry corridor and streets are actually not aligned on your entry because originally there was the dome and then they added the annex and then the building's off center and then we have one curb cut basically that is an entrance and exit, which is sort of confusing and dangerous, right? So one of our, we want to clean all that up, and where it's not just about big projects here, it's about the kind of holistic improvements to the site and making the place easier and more friendly to use. So realigning that, putting a new marquee in to announce your arrival at the community center is a really key thing. Also improvements to the main entrance itself, renovation of the 90,000 square feet of the existing community center, improvement to the parking lot which serves, the existing paved parking which serves that community center with landscape islands, sidewalks, better wayfinding, and the addition of a little bit more paved parking. We also think that it's important to take a look at how the land is being most effectively used. Right now, we do have two existing soccer fields at the east end, but they're sort of haphazardly placed right now. They eat up a large amount of ground just for those two soccer fields. So reorganizing that east end of the site and putting them side by side opens up more space for grass overflow parking or future development. And as we develop facilities here, of course, we need more parking, right? So another area is the paving of the area that's used for carnival. So paving a carnival lot, which will make the carnival more enjoyable event to visit, particularly if inclement weather happens to occur before or during the event. It'll also serve as our paved parking for number 6 here, which is a proposed new covered arena. And I'll go into a little bit more detail on that building later. Number 7 is a covered livestock building. It's a multi-use building. It's clear span. Could have horse stalls or livestock pens or small animal pens underneath it. And it essentially replaces the amount of livestock housing that the show currently uses in the indoor arena. So it allows them to move out of that arena and we can renovate the arena. 22 is a small new maintenance facility for maintenance equipment and tools and things. 13 would be the improved trailer and RV lot. So it's a trailer lot that's can be secured from the rest of the grounds, but it also has RVs along this edge. And I failed to mention also that this carnival lot also has RV hookups along both the north and south edges of it. So I think we have 52 RV hookups in our plan currently. And then we are maintaining the skate park and its parking and possibly adding some additional paved parking down in the southeast corner. And one of those other subtle changes I was mentioning is number 12. There's sort of an unofficial entry down at Ben Wilson that's just a couple of gates and a dirt road. This is where Livestock Show brings in trailers. We think it's important to formalize that entry, pave it, and properly fence and gate it. It happens to be kind of a secret way into the ball field parking area too that a lot of people know about. So it's probably best to formalize that. So we did a little analysis on parking because as we add venues like a covered arena that's 3,000 seats, we obviously need to figure out how to park it. We also have very large events like the Livestock Show, which require a lot of parking. So we did a little bit of parking analysis on this site, and we would have about 27 to 2,800 paved parking spaces, another 1,000 in grass, ADA spots. So we'd end up with, just under 4,000 parking spaces on this site, which would support the proposed buildings that we're recommending. As I mentioned earlier, one of the challenges with the current building is that core entrance area. We have really 3 different venues. We have the annex, the dome, and the indoor arena. When multiple events are occurring, there's a lot of conflict or potential for conflict between users. It's very congested. We think it's important to come up with a solution for that moving forward. And what we believe is a really good solution is that if the indoor arena is renovated, which is this building right here, that we create a new public entrance on the south end of it, which would coincide also with the public entrance to the arena on the south side, which is located here, with a nice covered public promenade along that entire south side of these buildings. So it gives each of those really 3 important large venues its own point of entry. We're able to hold multiple simultaneous events, everyone going through their own entry. We're able to control ticketed access better for producers that come in and rent the facility to put their shows on. It's also better for public safety and wayfinding. So, and of course, really our parking for the arena is out in that carnival ground. So that parking is directly across the boulevard right here. So some views of the master plan, I'll point out a few things. So this view kind of covers everything we just talked about. This is the carnival ground lot that gets paved. We have identified the potential to do a small satellite restroom facility right here because there is no restroom currently serving the skate park. So it would be good, it would be a great placement to help serve that, the users of the skate park, as well as when we have events going on in the carnival grounds, that we would have bathrooms outside of the buildings. This parking lot is primarily there to serve the arena and the expo, with the existing parking still serving the dome and the annex. And you can see the improved parking lot for trailers and RVs over by the new covered arena and the new covered livestock barn. The reorganized soccer fields and the grass overflow parking. And this is kind of obviously a depiction of the livestock show with the carnival in action. And then this is with the carnival not there, that lot is obviously used for parking. And then a couple more views from the northeast. What's important here is 2 things. One is just to point out that the way that parking works. So we have a main entrance here. This is our current main entrance for all of this parking on the east side of the site. But we have a major circulation artery going through in front of the what we're calling the new expo and the new arena. The concept is that when we do a large event like the livestock show, is that this area of the boulevard would get closed to vehicular traffic, and that would just become pedestrian only. So we have a great pedestrian promenade that's very wide. We can have food vendors, carnival vendors along that, feeding into each new entry of the building, and then across to the carnival. So there's not kids crossing car traffic. And then if we develop the new entry down at the southeast corner or southwest corner of Ben Wilson, that allows cars into the other parking on the other side of the site. So we think that works quite well. Another thing I want to point out is this arena building. So we looked at a couple of different options on how that building could be constructed, what's the most economic construction methods. The most straightforward, obviously, that most people would think about is a conventional pre-engineered steel building, metal roofing, masonry walls, which is what's depicted here. But there are other options. We could build that out of a fabric covered structure. It would, as you can tell, it would look very similar. There's a little bit of difference. But as we get into the cost, we'll kind of show you what that cost delta is between the two options and what the inside difference might look like. And here's a quick rendering of that kind of public promenade area that I was mentioning that could be closed off at those entries where we have the expo and the arena. So we'll dive into the community proposed renovations to the community center really quickly. So as I mentioned, there are some triggering existing conditions which kind of led us to this plan. One is that we have the conflict of the stage sound between the two venues, between the arena space and the dome space. There's really no way to resolve that with that stage in that location effectively, because we need to be able to have doors so we can get to the back of stage, which really kind of kills the ability to control sound. Additionally, the stage is really kind of small. It doesn't have ADA access. It really needs better green rooms and support spaces with it. So what we have proposed is that we actually relocate the stage, build a new larger stage that has storage adjacent to it, that's adjacent to a larger green room. And then we don't have the issue of that direct sound conflict. It also gives us the opportunity to open up that current stage area at a at-grade connection. And that allows us to have, if you include both the expo hall and the dome, about 45,000 square feet of contiguous flat floor space. This will be a selling benefit to you guys to attract events here. The more contiguous event space, the better. And then we're also proposing that we bump out this entry a little bit. So we're about doubling the square footage on the entry to help alleviate some of the congestion that occurs there, and remodel of the plaza area as well as the covered entry. Now, when we build the stage on this side, that's currently where the offices are. The offices don't have enough space, and they're also hard to see. It's hard to see from the offices what's going on and who's coming into the facility. So we're proposing that we take the stage area of the annex, which currently is hardly used at all, and remodel that as our future offices for administration. That would allow them to be up front and center, allows them to see out into the front entry and parking lot to kind of see who's coming and going, and allows guests to be able to identify where the office is better. There will be interior renovations in the existing annex, kitchen renovations, and then what we'd like to do, what we've proposed with the existing arena is that it become fully remodeled, heated and air conditioned. By the way, dome also fully heated and air conditioned moving forward, with a divisible partition in the arena, so it could be split into two different sides to potentially host two different events at one time. Concrete floor, new interior finishes, new lighting, technology, basically turning it into a new expo hall, a clean building. This would allow us to do things like sports, trade shows, banquets. Sports will be limited somewhat based on the building height, but we have some layouts of how that would work. We would propose at that new entry to take off actually two existing bays of the structure and rebuild that so that we can build in bathrooms, public entry lobby, as well as other support spaces that go directly from the parking across the boulevard and into the hall. And then some additional bathrooms on the backside, and probably looking at some additional flex rooms, 2 additional flexible spaces that are connected to the annex. Because as I mentioned, the annex is very heavily utilized. We think there's more capacity that could be utilized on that side. And another area that's really lacking in this facility is storage. So the addition of some storage space or utilization of part of our square footage is storage. So we did a analysis of kind of what our bathroom fixture count is to be sure we were meeting at least code requirements. That led us to the necessity to propose these built new bathrooms at the new entry as well as the ones at the back of the hall. But we've gone to some relative detail to confirm that all of this works.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
Do you still have the shared entrance for the annex and the dome?
We do have a shared annex for the entrance and dome. Yes, we do.
Okay.
That is something that could possibly be changed. But we felt with the expansion of the entrance lobby and moving the doors that are currently dividing the entrance lobby right here over to the edge of the annex corridor. And there are also 2 pairs of doors into this corridor from that entrance court right here. We felt that we could manage control of using those 2 sides, given their occupancy, if we didn't have the arena crowd also flowing through there.
Thank you.
But good question, though. And it may be that when we come to actual design of this, we need to make this entrance point right here a little bit more robust.
And one question too, on that, the annex and the visible flex rooms, can those be combined into one large room, or is the idea that they would be separate?
Yeah, well, we are showing a large overhead door right here. However, we have existing structure in that location that supports the arena structure. So we can't have a totally bulkhead-free open space connection because we have columns coming down as well as horizontal structural supports.
Okay.
We do have like I think a 12 by 12 overhead door that can be opened up to make it contiguous. However, we can't take the entire wall out.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
And then, as I mentioned, we looked at kind of what fits in that expo space. So looking at basketball, 3 courts with some seating, as well as the player areas, volleyball up to 4 courts, pickleball 10, trade show around 120, typical 10 by 10 booths. Of course, that's very flexible. Could do banquet of about 830 people at round tables, as well as indoor soccer. So although it has some limitations, it will be a very capable facility. More capable than it is today trying to do dirt events when it's clearly just doesn't meet the requirements.
And Todd, let me clarify real quick, if you can go back to the sports one. When this came up, and I just want to be clear for the benefit of the people that might be tuning in, is that because of the limitation of the ceiling height, the more practical and realistic use of courts would probably be centered more around recreational sports. It'd be very difficult to attract competitive tournaments because of the limitation of the ceiling height. But that, again, isn't an issue if you're just using it for recreational purposes, you know. So I just want to make that clarification.
Are you talking about the ceiling height of the new exhibit hall?
Yes, because it's the beam height can't change. I mean, you'd have to demolish the whole thing and rebuild something from scratch if you wanted to increase the height. And that was what's 20 feet. It's 20 feet at the edge and 22 feet at its highest point. And that's not high enough for competitive, high school and above level basketball or volleyball.
Because you're talking about renovating the annex. You're not talking about new construction not being tall
We're
enough.
talking about renovating the existing arena.
Arena. I'm sorry.
Into the expo hall, yeah.
Right.
But the renovation wouldn't increase the height of the ceiling because you'd have to basically demolish the whole thing and rebuild it
Right.
if you wanted to do that.
Right, so 25 feet clear is recommended for competitive basketball, for example, as the lowest point above the court, or 20. So we did actually do a study of excavating the floor to try to get more height out of the building. And we actually sent the crew out and potholed inside the arena because we suspected there are concrete encased tie beams connecting the bottom of the columns across the arena. And indeed there are, and they're about 2 feet below the surface. So that would only buy us 2 feet. And the removal of the tie beams, reinforcing the structure is definitely excessive work to do to get 3 additional feet, and would basically make the cost so expensive that we should tear down and rebuild. So there is a bit of compromise, but at this point we also haven't clearly determined that there's a real market for competitive tournaments, right? So we did do quite a bit of examination of how we could potentially get to 25 feet, but it's just not going to be practical with the building that we have to work with. So kind of going back to some of that architecture precedent stuff we looked at, we developed some architectural concepts, and it's very important to keep in mind, design is yet to happen. These are just, we wanted to have something to show representative of what we were thinking in terms of the scale of these projects. We also needed something to put dollars to come up with a budget. So we developed some renderings of some design concepts for the entries. And it's kind of, if you notice, there's a V in the structure for Victoria. We kind of played off of that. And we wanted something that at the existing entrance that kind of represented the proposed new buildings. So the new expo hall entry, and then we'll get to the arena. The arena is very similar. So the program for the arena really came out of the survey information and then working with the stakeholders that came, particularly from Livestock Show, and understanding what they needed and the size. And for rodeo, we're going to need a minimum of 130 by 280 floor, and we kind of identified a capacity of 3,000 in fixed seats as the target program for the arena. That would allow us up to somewhere between 4,000 to 5,000 in a concert setting when we're using floor seating. So we really wanted to try to keep the build as minimal as possible. We're proposing using pre-engineered steel building. This is the primary column line here and here behind the seating. Seating arranged in a horseshoe with the end open. And this end opens back up to where the existing livestock barn is. It would have a covered connector across to that building. And then the only fully interior spaces are the restrooms, concessions, this ticket office and other restrooms. There's a show office and restrooms back in these corners. Those would be masonry, climate-controlled areas. The rest of it is open air covered. So this is kind of what the seating arrangement looks like. We anticipate, the way we priced it and thought about it was that we'd have kind of box seats or chair back seats in the bottom half of the bowl with bleacher backs at the back part. And we're showing a typical rodeo layout in the arena in this diagram. So 3,000 seats in the seating bowl as permanent seating. Then as a concert, we can go from 4,000 to 5,000 seats. This is showing 4,000 seats using not the entire arena. If we back the stage up to the back end of the arena, we can get another 1,000 people in here. But probably most common will be in the layout that we're showing at about 4,000. Works quite nicely, be a very nice venue. And then we looked at a couple of other options. There is a minimum build if we reduce the capacity to 2,000 seats. It would, of course, save a little bit of capital budget, but it would forever limit you to just those 2,000 fixed seats. So that is not the direction we headed with it. Here's a quick rendering of kind of what we thought the seating bowl would look like, showing the chair backs and the bleacher backs, and then in the concert setting. And then that rendering of the that main entrance, it looks very much like the Expo Center, and then both of them together with that connecting promenade along the front. So as I discussed, there was an option that we priced for a fabric structured arena, and these are quite common. This is a picture of one in Arizona, very similar to a pre-engineered steel building. The difference is that the roof membrane is a fabric. It still has a rigid frame, as you can see. It's not like a space frame. So it's a pretty conventional looking building. We can have as long a span as a conventional steel building has. This particular building that's photoed, this system has a 30-year warranty, which is similar to any metal building that we use throughout the country. The difference is it's a much lighter structure. It's much more cost effective. That can be enclosed. As you see, this one is fully enclosed. We would always want to anticipate that some point in the future a covered arena may become enclosed, so it's designed and engineered that way. However, it could never have a metal roof on it because the structure can't bear that weight. It would always be a fabric roof, and that has some benefits, right? You can see that there's a tremendous amount of daylighting in it, which is cool. Fabric is also non-conductive, so it doesn't condense and sweat inside the building, even if we did enclose it. But it has some limitations if it were enclosed and wanted to be heated and air conditioned, in terms of we'd have to go back and put a insulation liner in it, which would then eliminate the daylighting. It would add cost to it that otherwise, if we built a pre-engineered building up front, we probably wouldn't incur once we enclose it. So there are some trade-offs, but as you'll see when I talk about costs, there is a pretty big delta between a traditional pre-engineered building and the fabric.
In regards to the structurability, we live here in South Texas. There are hurricanes. What's the hurricane rating on different structures? Would a
It's
fabric
Actually,
even be-
exactly the same. We have some of these in Hallandale Beach, Florida, that are used for racing barns. And, you know,
Yes.
the structural and design requirements there are incredibly strict. They have some of these in these buildings, these structures above the Arctic Circle, actually, that are heated, which is pretty amazing to me. But we've been doing a lot of research on these recently, in particular, because we're using similar structures in Maryland for some horse racing barns that have to be heated in the winter. And we do have 2 of these at Westworld in Scottsdale, Arizona, that have been there for about 24 years and still have the original membrane on them. So they've weathered the sun and the UV quite well out in the desert. So yeah, that is definitely a design consideration. They will meet it or exceed it. And really, I mean, this is the kind of area of the country that these buildings were originally designed for, really, where heating wasn't such a significant issue.
With these being fabric, is there any impact on sound? So for example, if we were to use the arena for a concert, does the fabric roof impact sound?
No, it's actually really good for sound because it's non-conductive, both with sound and temperature. They're actually pretty good. So if we had like a metal building without insulation in it, it'd obviously be horrible acoustically, right? So insulation is pretty important when we're using metal buildings for concert venues and things. And this will perform almost exactly the same as a metal building with a lot of insulation through the roofs and walls. So I'll kind of run through our budget estimates, and this is very high level. We do have pretty detailed cost assessments on each of these options. So total project budget, and this is broken down really into 4 pieces. The community center renovation, so that's the 90,000 square feet, full renovation, comes in at just under 18 million. Then we have the covered multi-use barn, which I didn't show a lot of, but that's the covered barn that kind of is next to the existing livestock barn. It takes the place of the square footage utilized in the existing arena during livestock show. Is just over 3 million. That's also as a pre-engineered steel building. There is obviously an option to look at that also as a fabric structured building with probably a pretty good reduction there. And then the new covered event arena as a pre-engineered building is about 20 million. And then site improvements are about 5 million. And that includes everything across the site, the relocation of the soccer fields, paving of the carnival lot, the redo of our main lot, landscaping, the entries, pretty much everything in there. So that,
These are pretty impressive numbers. What do you mean by a pretty big savings for the differences in the roof?
You'll see it.
Okay, all
I've got a summary of that to show you.
right, thank you.
So everything all in as we've kind of conceived it is around $45 million. And this does have a lot of factors built into it. This is not just the cost of construction. This has architecture and engineering fees. It has a 15% contingency because it hasn't been designed yet, right? It also has, most of it has 4 years of escalation because we assume it will be at least a minimum of a year before we could bid anything, even if we started design now. And the reality of that is nil. So we assume that most of it would not start construction for at least 4 years. So we have 4 years of escalation in most of this. We have contractor fees, insurance, bonds, testing. All of that is baked into this number. So that this is not just the cost of construction, then you had to find 30% more. This is it, the whole package. And this is where, so the fabric arena. So you see, so our covered event arena is about 19.5 million. Same capacity, a little bit different design, but with the same bathrooms, offices, et cetera. That building goes to just under 9 million. So there's a huge cost delta in just the change of that structure. And we actually did get a number from a supplier on it. So it's about $11 million delta in the entire project, reduction potential. And as I mentioned, if we looked at the covered multi-use barn as the same type of structure, I think there would be a really significant number of savings there as well if we wanted to do that. So that's the reason we included that fabric option, is it really does potentially have a lot of impact to your budget. You know, and that's money you either don't have to spend or it could be spent on another project. And then we looked at, what would be a logical way to phase this stuff. So really what we came up with is that phase one, we ideally would like to get to the community center renovation first. We have a really good asset there that's heavily utilized, and it needs to be improved. We need to take care of that asset rather than allow it to continue to have deferred maintenance. And within that, there are phases within that project itself, right, to really make sense out of it. So the very first step that we would do is we would do the arena portion. We would renovate the arena, enclose it, finish it, climate control it, build a new entry. And that would allow us to take the front part out of service while still supporting the quinceaneras and the events that are always occurring there. And then we could renovate the front part. So we do have a logical approach to, we don't want to just shut everything down for a year and a half. We can do things in a manner that we don't displace events and users. We would want to build the covered multi-use barn also, because when we turn the arena into a clean building, they're not going to want to be putting their animals in there. So we need to replace that support space for the livestock show. And then we have about half of our site improvements in that first phase as well, which we detailed out what those are in the cost estimate. So that first phase is just right at about $23.6 million. Phase two, and this is again using the conventional steel building, new covered event arena at about 19.5, and then the other roughly half of the site improvements, so about 22.2 million. Now, if we look at phase two with the fabric option, that drops about $11 million. Sorry, hit the wrong button. So that reduction of about 11 million. So 22 with the pre-engineered structure and about 11.4 with the fabric structure. So we tried to kind of keep these numbers consistent all the way through so you could see what the real comparison was. We do, as we kind of were going through cost, we talked through a number of ideas. If we wanted to try to get the whole project budget with the Fabric Arena down to like 30 million versus 34, Jesus is kind of like, what could we do? And I'm like, well, there's some options, right? We could obviously take the step back on the capacity of the arena from 3,000 to 2,500 or 2,000. We could take a look at that. We could also, that would obviously, if we reduce the capacity, it reduces the need for the number of bathroom fixtures. So we could look at things like removing concessions, using portable concessions. We could use the fabric structure for the multi-use barn, as I mentioned. We could take a look at the scope of what we're proposing for the community center renovations, what is really needed, what's not needed. And we could also do the same for the site. We've got about $7 million almost in site. Is there some site improvements that we don't need to do right away? So there are still a lot of kind of seeds to be found in that cost and in that scope of work that could be looked at. And that is all I have in my presentation. If you have any additional questions, happy to answer.
This is probably more of a Gilbert question. There you are. I mean,
If you're going to
we're-
ask
we're-
about funding, pay, and all that stuff, I'm
Nope,
going to.
nope, I'm
Okay.
talking about potential revenue after this is done. And what increase do we anticipate?
Go ahead, I won't even jump on it.
Yeah, we haven't gotten to that level of depth with it.
Okay.
So, at this stage, this is very, very preliminary. There's definitely still quite a bit of work that needs to take place to discern, to what extent are we wanting to invest? What is the return of that investment? But I would caution / suggest that if that's a path that we want to go, that we align ourselves on how we're defining return of investment. Because if I were to ask all of you right now, you'd probably give me a different answer, right? It'd probably range from, for me, return of investment means that the revenue generated by the rentals would cover the operating expense, right? For somebody else, it might mean economic impact, in the community, right? And so those are conversations that we need to have to ensure that we're very clear with what is the objective here. Because I can tell you and Todd can tell you too, from his experience with other facilities, these types of investments, you never, directly speaking, would recover the funds just through rentals. The Alamo Dome, when we worked for the city of San Antonio, runs in the red every single year. So this is a quality of life kind of investment. The return typically comes from the secondary impacts by bringing more people into town, them shopping in town, eating at your restaurants, and that economic type of impact. And we haven't gotten to that level of detail to analyze that yet. The purpose of presenting this tonight, and I'll use your question as a segue, is to really start just sharing with you in a more public manner where we are, how much it's costing, so that we can start having conversations about priorities, basically, right? And start having conversations with you and stakeholders around, what is some of that give and take? So, for example, are we truly open to, a fabric roof option, right? Obviously, we're seeing the cost impact of that, and that would make a huge difference with how we develop a strategy to potentially fund this all at once or phase it out. And so those are the types of conversations that we need to be having. But for now, I'll leave it at that before I kind of go into a little bit greater depth on funding and stuff like that. Any questions more specific for Todd?
Thank you so much for the information and presentation. Obviously, it's a really cool ideas. I know a lot of hard work went into it, and we appreciate it. Obviously, this project has the potential to be transformative, not only for the community center grounds itself, but for the community as a whole. And so we appreciate the work you put into it, and very impressive results. Thank you.
Thank you guys very much. Thank you.
Great. So I'm actually going to piggyback off of that before I actually talk about the next topic, because I do want to convey a little bit of what comes next for us, right? Some of it is some of the more analysis that I alluded to, but more specifically, we need to start having conversations around just how is it like, regardless of where we end up on, whether it's a 30 million or 40 million or however it ends up, we need to start being very transparent and open with how realistic it is for us to even be able to get to any of those numbers, right? And the reality is that it's going to have to be a combination of course, having a conversation about our existing debt availability and our existing COs, right? So there's going to have to be a conversation there. There's going to have to be a conversation with like the Sales Tax Development Corporation as well, for example. And then there's going to have to be some creative outside the box thinking. We're not the first community to try and improve upon or build a facility like this. And so one of the very first things we do, of course, is, well, how do other communities fund, buildings like this? And so one of those ways, and I distributed a handout, and I want to talk about it for a few minutes, but I distributed a handout with sports and community venue tax. And to be very clear, the state law around a sports and community venue tax provides a slew of different options on how you can basically create a revenue source that could help go towards one of these projects. And the couple of one-pagers that you have, and I'll leave those with you so you can review in your own time. The main points that I want to make is that there is an avenue towards creating some financial capacity through the sports and community venue tax. Communities do these all across the state of Texas to fund similar projects. The one-pager defines what a venue is, and so this project, the community center renovation project, would fall well in line with the definition of what a venue project means. And then more importantly, there's a slew of different options on how you can administer different revenue sources, or I guess I should say establish different revenue sources, ranging from a sales tax revenue source to a short-term motor vehicle rental tax towards a hotel occupancy tax. And so I want to be very clear that what we want to talk about and begin having a conversation with you is solely centered around the hotel occupancy tax option. This is a very, very common option to pursue because of the connection and direct link between heads and beds and having more events in your community in a venue like this. And obviously, as we all know, those that pay the hotel occupancy tax are our visitors. Our local residents do not pay hotel occupancy taxes at our local hotels. And so to be very clear, the option that we're pursuing is strictly centered around the hotel occupancy tax. And I want to begin having that conversation with you around, well, how much money do we think could be generated if we do pursue this option? What are the mechanics around it? Some of the features to note is that venue projects do have to be approved by voters. And so if we did pursue a venue tax through the hotel occupancy tax mechanism, it would necessitate a voter approval adoption of that venue project. We are still doing a lot of analysis on trying to determine whether this is a path worth pursuing, but we need to start talking about it because it's certainly one of the three pieces that would probably be critical in order for us to even do anything at the community center. And so happy to entertain any questions. I know this is a new topic that has come up, but for now, it's simply just an introduction of the topic. Want to provide some materials for you, and we intend to fully explore the feasibility of that option, as well as explore the feasibility of debt capacity and the feasibility of leveraging Sales Tax Development Corporation over the next 2 or 3 months. And our intent is that at the December workshop, we would come before you with a little bit more definitive analysis on how we might, let's say, put together 25 million, 30 million, 35 million, so that we can start having some priority conversations around what we want to do or not.
Very good. Any questions at this time?
Is a project like this eligible, or does it qualify for certain types of grant money or funding?
That's a great question. So as of very rarely, I'll start off by saying very rarely, oftentimes what makes them eligible are components that make it a different purpose. So as an example, I'll use Kingsville as an example. That's just a perfect example. So JK Northway in Kingsville, they asked a very similar question. You know, what would it take to apply for grants? Well, basically they converted it into a safe room as well, right? So that it would be eligible for FEMA grants, as an example. Now, obviously, that necessitates changing the design, and doing other things, right? So where is the value? How much money could we get from a FEMA grant, for that? I don't know, right? But you'd have to change the design. So the point is, there probably would be some grant opportunities, but we'd have to change the project to incorporate whatever requirements would be needed in order to pursue that particular grant, if that makes any sense. Right. Yeah, and that St. Joseph High School is a perfect example, right? With the dome facility.
And obviously, there's certain obligations that come with that also in terms of use of that and.
Right, and who has
ongoing
access to
costs
it
related
when,
to that
right.
and that sort of
Yeah.
thing, so, yeah.
But there's certainly pathways to that. I mean, if we think of the reality that, when we're talking about cooling and heating, significant amount of square footage here, right, that currently is not air conditioned and heated, that in theory, could open the door to, not during a hurricane, because it's not a hurricane rated facility, but could open the door for it to be utilized as a warming shelter during the winter, as an example, or a cooling shelter during hot summer. The facility would not be rated hurricane rated, but it would open the door for those types of uses if we wanted to explore that.
Well, we need to explore that.
Sure, we certainly can, but there's other things to explore, right? And so I think for now, as I was mentioning, the plan over the next 2 or 3 months is to just continue to develop some options for you to present to you in December, on top of Gilbert's usual December debt capacity presentation that he does at every December workshop. That'll align well with the conversation around options and how to think creatively on how to create debt capacity, basically.
Are there certain strings attached? Let's say the whole arena and everything is tied up with events, and we have a horrible heat, which now we have to open it up as a cooling center. From there, does one supersede the other, and we have to kick out events?
That decision would be local. So, yeah, so unless it becomes a FEMA facility, we're in control. If it becomes a FEMA-centric facility, then that would be the case where we basically relinquish control. I don't envision, quite frankly, this ever being that. The cost to build it up to become a FEMA facility would just be too cost prohibitive to, even if it came with a grant, would be too cost prohibitive to even pursue, quite frankly.
Perfect.
But, yeah.
I think the FEMA thing is a possibility, but not a probability, given all the extra that comes with it, costs being one of the biggest extras.
Yeah, I just didn't want to
in
lose
my mind.
control.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think the message is, this is a great concept. It's a great starting point for further discussions. And I think there's just more to come on this as these options are developed.
100%, that's the plan. But there was a lot of, to your point, there was a lot of work that was put into getting to this stage, and so we felt it was the right time to start talking about it publicly with you.
Very good. Are we ready to segue into the next?
We can.
Okay, if we're going to do that, why don't we do this? Why don't we take a short break, just to let everyone stretch their legs, and Councilman Lofgren is happy, very good. It is 2:43, why don't we take like a 5-minute break? I know we still have a lot to do this afternoon, and so we will be back in 5 minutes.
I believe so.
Do we have everyone we need?
Yeah, for sure.
So many people,
But this isn't on, is it?
they didn't find this.
Come on, come on, come on.
Nobody cares about the rest of this.
Okay, ready?
George, we good? Okay.
Okay, so this next item is really just literally a 5-minute just verbal update on my part related to where we stand with sports facilities to basically just convey to you a basic timeline on a couple of initiatives that are ongoing. So for context, we completed a sports facility assessment last year, which was conducted by sports facilities companies. And since then, basically prioritized trying to look at Riverside Stadium, trying to look at the adult sports complex, which Todd alluded to, and improvements to the youth sports complex. And so in order to do that, we've entered into separate agreements with a couple of firms. And so this week, for example, we entered into a contract with Half and Associates. Half conducted our Parks Master Plan. They were one of the firms that responded to the RFQ that David alluded to earlier. And so we've engaged them to take a deeper dive into the improvements to the adult sports complex. Todd's master plan for the adult sports complex, as you saw with some of the renderings, did take a stab at some improvements to that. However, Populous doesn't necessarily specialize in designing that type of venue, if you will, or fields. And so that's why we've now engaged Half and Associates to do that. And so over the course of the next 2 months, similar to our effort to pursue some funding opportunities or options for the community center to present you in December, we'll be working with Half to develop basically a cost estimate on what it would cost for the improvements for the adult sports complex, as well as improvements to the youth sports complex. At the same time, we've re-engaged Sports Facilities Company to help us do a conceptual plan of Riverside Stadium. Riverside Stadium, as you know, is in the floodway, and so it creates some challenges when you're talking about improvements. Nonetheless, we want to still go through the exercise of figuring out how best we can improve Riverside Stadium for all of its users. Let's keep in mind, of course, that when Riverside Stadium was first built, we didn't have a university baseball team, and so and the needs for that have just significantly changed. And so we're already in the process of doing a conceptual master plan for Riverside Stadium with sports facilities. So again, we envision in December, at our workshop in December, presenting you with the results, if you will, of the recommendation of the improvements for the adult sports complex, youth sports complex, and Riverside Stadium. At the same time as producing some cost estimates for you and some financing options for the community center. Why this is all important is that why this is important to have the conversation about all of these things at the same time is because money, right? And so I fully expect that what's going to happen is a priority conversation with you and a decision from you around what do we prioritize. And so, you heard Todd mention that a new outdoor arena at the community center under the fabric option could cost roughly $11 million. Well, if for $11 million we could get, as an example, a revamped, improved Riverside Stadium, then and money is limited, then the decision is where do you prioritize that $11 million? Do you invest it in a new arena behind the community center to be able to attract rodeo events, horse cutting events, et cetera? Or do you invest it at Riverside in terms of priority order, right? And which, to Dr. Young's point, some of that is, what is the return of that investment? Is there a greater return on the investment to delay the construction of the outdoor arena because there's a greater return of the investment to do it on the baseball side? Those are the types of conversations that we'll need to have beginning in December. And my goal is to, by then, be prepared to provide numbers to you on a refined cost estimate for community center, cost estimates for the adult sports complex, cost estimates for the youth sports complex, so we can begin that conversation, basically.
Speaking of youth sports, driving down by Riverside Soccer Complex this last Saturday, the lots were full everywhere. parking along Red River where we're not supposed to have parking, but there
Right.
was, I don't know, 50, 100 cars along through there because of the amount of people that were over there. Is there any plan to improve parking to meet the demand that that complex has?
Sure, no, great question. We're going to build a parking lot just for U4 soccer. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we actually in fiscal year '24 and it's transitioned to fiscal year '25 in the VSTDC budget, we have funds for phase 2. And phase 2 would include formalizing the former concrete foundation on that side. I know there's issues on the other side and I'll get to that in a second, but the original phase 2 was making improvements to that concrete foundation to add some parking spaces up on it, as well as some minor improvements to the other side of that foundation just to better formalize parking on that side of the complex. Part of phase 2 was also to start doing some analysis on the triangular piece of property that is owned by us that's at the intersection of Red River and Bluff Street. Basically across the street from where the select soccer fields are on the Bluff Street side of the complex. As you know, that used to be a site where there was just a lot of brush and debris that was left there. And so that's why there's the need to do some type of studies to just figure out what do we need to do in order to actually make that a legitimate parking lot. Because long-term, we believe that the adequate solution is to do that, basically, so that we can spread out the flow of parking on either side of the complex, with the majority of it definitely still being where it is now, but at least having some parking formalized on the intersection of Red River and Bluff Street. In the meantime, we are exploring options on how we might be able to enhance parking off of Bluff Street. We definitely think there's a feasibility of being able to facilitate some parking off of Bluff Street. We definitely want to continue to discourage, as difficult as it is, we definitely want to still continue to discourage there being parking off Red River, just because it's a much higher speed and highly more utilized street, that if we want to remain mindful of families and kids walking across the street, coming out of cars, et cetera. So that's where we are with that. We can definitely prepare a more specific update as it relates to that concept at an upcoming meeting. But that's where we are with that.
I was quite surprised to see the amount of parking even on the other side of that concrete pad.
Correct, yeah, it's
so to
already there,
speak.
yeah.
I know this is probably impossible and engineering couldn't be designed, but so many people, it's morning, it's kids, they arrive late. If there's any way that we could somehow engineer a drop-off zone where the entire family's arriving, but they want to open the doors, let somebody jump out along with an adult. And I know I can't think of a way to do it, and we're talking about Red River, but, just sort of put that in the back of your head, that's one of the reasons for a lot of the parking on Red River, that coupled with just not having other places to park.
Well, there's still a fence there and there's an open ditch.
I've seen lots of people, the kid goes over
Right.
the fence and
Oh, wow.
just because of and I know they've stretched out the timing of the games, which has helped some, but it's just a thought as we're trying to accommodate.
Sure. No, we can certainly look at that, but obviously there's limitations because of the ditch and things of that sort. And we also don't want to make it a free-for-all, or at least encourage a free-for-all, right?
And I don't,
I can tell you from having seen, more, and maybe some of you have as well in traveling to other communities that, have more parking spaces. It doesn't matter how many parking spaces we built. It doesn't matter where you put entrances, where you put exits. There will always be people that will still try and park wherever they want, basically, and will still put their kids in an unsafe situation by literally dropping them off just wherever, right? And so
well, that's what I'm thinking.
yeah, so we
even-
can do what we can to help increase, the capacity for parking, explore the feasibility of a drop-off zone, but it'll be very difficult to completely solve, what some people simply just choose to do, right?
That's what I was thinking, even within the parking lot or on one of the side streets or
Yeah.
something, just to open the
Well, and
thought.
what we've observed, and I've personally observed it now that I'm there, as Coach G, but anyway, is that, even in the parking lot where we do have striped areas that people aren't supposed to park in, they're still parking in them.
Right.
Right, so even if we designated an area as a drop-off zone, people would still park in it because people are just parking wherever they want, basically. And we're not enforcing, that either, right? So it's definitely a double-edged sword, right? And so we continue to explore it. Yes, sir.
Has any further thought been put into paving that grassy area across the street from the Riverside Stadium at that intersection of Red River and what is that, John F. Lee?
The area where they used
The Horseman's Arena used to be?
yes.
Because during the what was that, Memorial Day Bash, and I know a lot of events, people park there, but because there's no striping, they just kind of go in there anyway. But
Sure.
we needed some type of
I don't-
organization. Like
Yeah,
asphalted.
I don't recall off the top of my head what the recommendation in the Parks Master Plan was. I can tell you, though, that corner has been discussed as part of the Riverside Stadium Master Plan. Because as part of the Riverside Stadium Master Plan, part of that conversation is parking. And so we do expect, and I do expect that the recommendation for the Riverside Stadium Master Plan will include adding parking, and that is an area that is being explored as an option.
All right, any other questions on sports facilities? All right, do we want to move on then to the less exciting but ever important topic of lead service line inventory?
Yeah, go for it, and I'll let Greg introduce this topic.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council.
Good afternoon.
In June of 2023, the City of Victoria partnered with the RJN Group to go ahead and do a lead service line inventory that was put in place by the Environmental Protection Agency in December 2021. Here to present is Jose Maldonado with the RJN Group. But before he does present, I did just want to go ahead and tell him, thank you for all the hard work that him and his staff did and working with us. They did a phenomenal job, not just in this project, but also the I&I study that we did recently. So without further ado, here it is.
Hey, good afternoon, welcome.
Thank you, and good afternoon, council. Happy to be here to present, and also I do want to thank, just like he thanked us, it was a successful project because staff was very helpful in what we needed, and especially additional information that we could not figure out on our own. So definitely want to be thanking them for that. So with that, maybe repeating a few things, but just like I mentioned, there's a few new council members that were not there last time we presented on this, is just a quick overview on what the lead and copper inventory is. So like Greg mentioned, December 2021, EPA revised their regulations through the Safe Water Drinking Act to implement a lead and copper rule, which was really meant to try to reduce that. I'm sure y'all remember, it seems like it was ages ago, but what happened in Flint and all those things, those really was the genesis of what began this entire process. And as you know, with these processes, it takes time to take effect, the regulations come through, and requirements to fully come through down to the state and then to the cities. So the first deadline coming up, which is around the corner, is the October 16th of this year to submit the inventory, which is the first part of this rule. Again, I mentioned the purposes are, again, really just to, Safe Water Drinking Act is really for public health reasons, trying to reduce these sources of lead in drinking water. But the purpose of this program is, really, you don't know how you're going to reduce it until you know what your problem really is. And that's really what this first round is trying to establish what the inventory of the lead in each community is. And then determine what the future of that, what you need to do to address it, whether it's replacement or outreach, a lot of different things, but it all begins with what do you have to work with at each community. Now, the EPA did delegate down this to each state to manage the leaded service inventory, so we are working through TCEQ. In the past year or so, they've been putting out information on how they want to receive this information, spreadsheets, guidelines, and many different things that's been evolving as recent as a month ago. They were still having some updates on how they want to do some certain things. So part of this process has been keeping up with what the TCEQ is continuing to put out to make sure that they receive the inventory as they want to see it. Again, we've got to mention that October 16th date, which is coming up soon. And this is meant to capture every single connection that you have in your system. So again, a lot of that goes to having good record keeping, which the city does really good as far as, capturing all the customers that are getting water from the city. So that was a great start. And more importantly, how great it is already tied to your GIS, your Geo-Information Systems, which shows the location of all your meters. That was great. We've seen many other cities that have a more rudimentary, here's your spreadsheet, here's your 10,000 connections, go at it. Here we actually had a good mapping system. We knew where things were. Now, did we find every single meter? No. I mean, there were some that were a little tricky, but out of, you'll see the numbers later, but out of 25,000 plus connections, we were like less than 5% we had issues, identified the material. Actually, we found them in some cases we couldn't determine, but very, very small percentage, so we weren't able to determine. So we were really happy that, kind of accuracy that we get on the information. So next thing, this really we're not quite at the accepted part of the inventory, as we'll be submitting that by early next week. We plan to have it in by Monday. There's some troubleshooting that we're going through with that new online form that they put out last month. But again, I think we have the data. It's just a matter of making sure that everything fits perfectly where they want to see it. So another step back. So again, this process started last year, right? It's been over a year that we started this. And the first part of what we did was the phase one, which is a desktop review. Now, the reason for this is obviously we wanted to reduce the amount of actually physical go look at your pipes and find out what that material is. So that was working with the city, looking through construction records, the GIS data, which I guess was a huge source for getting this information, plumbing codes, which was key to determine or confirm when we can say, after this year, the codes said that you cannot have this, right? So and it matched up with many communities. Again, a lot of this is also making sure that we are doing things by the book through TCEQ and using guidelines that are, accepted by them. And that is one of them. So like everything, for example, 1989 and further, we had the records as far as the agenda, not agendas, council minutes where it was approved, that the codes was going on. And also we did some rough testing on some of them. Was the materials matching up based on the information you had? And it was, where materials were either copper or some kind of plastic, where the HDPE or PEX or things like that. So that wiped out a fair number of places that we did not need to go, and it was accepted by TCEQ that we can report it that way, that by age we can eliminate those. Also, the capital improvement plan. So this is really working with the city on using that information that this area here was done so and so. We know what this material is. Again, we could circle it through, X that out. Tap cards is also part of the record keeping of where that was put into GIS. Some of that information was there on what that material was, so we used that information and verified it on a few chances that we could. And again, it was great. Community outreach, that's one that we had it under to maybe reach out, but we didn't quite get into, so we didn't get much of a response on that portion of it. But we still knocked out quite a bit. So out of 25,000 connections, so give you an idea, it's 25,000 connections, so that means we had to provide information on the public side of the meter and the private side of the meter. So double that number as far as the inventory we needed. So over 50,000 data points that we need to gathered. As you can see in that summary, won't go through all the numbers, but in general, you can see that we were able to knock out 17,000 on the public side, which is where we have the most information, obviously, and about 9,000 on the private side, meaning that we did not have to go do field investigations to get that information. So again, that was a lot of help through the city staff and making sure that we identified it. And the other thing too is we were keeping track of this so we can pass it back to the city and we can update GIS as needed so this information is kept safe and we don't lose all the work that we've done here. So with that being said, that means we needed to go into the phase 2, which is the field inspection. And this in general meant going through all the water meters and going through and trying to determine what category they were in, whether it was a non-lead plastic, non-lead copper, galvanized pipe, possibly lead. So we had different techniques of, some of them were very simple, using a magnet, does it stick? Scratch the pipe, and they're all kind of very simple, but they tell the information you need to try to determine the pipe. So once we went through that exercise, and again, that was quite a bit. We had over 16,000 meters that we attempted and to get that information. And we did that through using with iPads. So we're collecting digitally in the field, so all that information comes in easy later on, less of a chance of issues of transferring data from paper back to form, since final submittal is going to be electronic form. So here's a summary of the inspections that we did. Like I said, 7,300 of those is where we needed to look on both on the public and on the private side of the meter. And 8,800, well, there's add another 300 where we wanted to confirm some public, but we had about 8,800 where we just needed to confirm what the private side. We were very comfortable on what the public side information was. We just needed to verify what those were on the private side. And right there on the bottom, you can see what the results were. Primarily, you have a copper and plastic in your city. And the big thing that you don't see on that list is lead, right? Which obviously is what we were hoping for. And I know we had several meetings before, there's concerns of why we're doing this exercise. We don't have lead. And unfortunately, you have to prove that you don't have lead, and happy to report that you don't have lead, right? So,
How much did that cost?
so there's a lot more numbers. We could split them up as much as you like as far as percentages of what is what, but and there's some pretty pictures of what the material breakdown is for your city. But the more important thing is, again, no lead. Again, we're going to be submitting this data in the next few days, and this data is going to be submitted to the state. And this is, like I mentioned, this is the first deadline. We don't foresee anything more coming back for the city since we did not find any issues. But the state EPA and the state are forever evolving this rule. So we'll see what comes next. There may be questions on how we determine some of the information. Like I said, there were some that we made good, I would say, engineering judgment to what the materials are, where we could not find necessarily the meter, or it would require excavating a pipe, which we didn't want to do in people's front yard and so on. But I think we have good responses, good tracking to respond if that comes. But yeah, there's going to be a lot of data uploaded to the state, so a timeline to what the next step is, don't have one. If there was going to be a need for a replacement, the next step is really to lay out a replacement schedule within the next year. Lay out the schedule, not complete the schedule. But again, since you don't have leads that need to be addressed, we are at a stopping point at this time unless there's further revisions to that rule.
Any questions?
It's a good
So,
report.
yeah, no, great report. Obviously, we appreciate RGN Group and the work that's gone into that. You know, I jokingly said that I think if a community such as ours passes with no lead, then the EPA should have to refund our cost or reimburse our costs. But apparently, that's not going to happen. So, but we appreciate you helping us stay in compliance with our EPA overlords and going through this program. And we're very glad with the results. So, thank you very much.
You're very welcome. All right.
Mr. Garza, you have one more report for us, I believe?
Yeah, I do, and I'm going to stand up for this one, and I promise we'll be done by 3:30 so we can focus the last 30 minutes on doing something else. So,
Mr. Rainey, would you like to take the over or the under on that promise?
we'll see. Figure it out without me. So, so you're eating into my time. Okay, so really briefly, I wanted to come around and circle back with you in this setting on a topic that I know is very, very important, which is related to water. You know, recently GBRA has undertaken a pretty significant project that they, for example, recently presented at the Chamber of Commerce luncheon, and they've talked publicly in other communities. And I wanted to share with you a little bit of what they're looking at doing, its cost impact to us, and a recommendation moving forward. A lot of this is driven by population growth. And so you'll notice that a lot of the population growth in Texas is, of course, hovered around the three major MSAs, Dallas, Houston, San Antonio. GBRA specifically is more focused and concerned with the area between San Antonio and Austin, basically. GBRA is responsible for Kendall County, Comal County, Guadalupe County, Gonzales, DeWitt, Victoria, Calhoun. This is just a little snapshot of their geographic area where they play a role in supplying water. I won't go through the details of it, but this is just a breakdown that basically shows how much water they have access to and how much is contracted. And really the big takeaway from this is that the bulk of their water on the top half of this chart is basically contracted, and the part at the bottom, specifically the lower basin area, is not. And that's very, very relevant because of where the lower basin is located on a map. And so in a nutshell, they're embarking on a project they're referring to as Water Secure, which is basically build a pipeline that would take a significant amount of water, somewhere between 130,000 to 150,000 acre feet of water per year at full build out, from what they refer to as the lower basin to the area of central Texas that is experiencing significant population growth, which is the area between San Antonio and Austin. And I'll show a couple of other just maps to kind of show, you know, they kind of divide their service area between referring to it as, you know, mid-basin to the lower basin area. And this is the part that, of course, is more geographically low. It's just closer to us. And you'll see, you know, some of these names on there will ring a bell. Of course, you see Port of Victoria on there. You see INEOS. You see Dow. They basically have the geographic area around those plants. But in essence, GBRA has water rights to over 100,000 acre feet of water in that area of the state, which is referred to as the lower basin. And because there is no significant water demand in this part of the state, but there is in central Texas, is why they basically want to build a water pipeline to take water from this part of the state to central Texas. Does that make sense? And that's basically what they've presented publicly. And basically it's because of the population growth. And so this chart they've shown to kind of show you how even just over the last 20 years, the different water plans have significantly increased that population growth. And so at the very, very bottom of this, the lowest line is a blue line, which shows the projected population growth in the 2001 Region L plan. And then you go all the way to the top, which is the green line, which is a much, obviously that growth is more significant and it's coming quicker, basically, right? And so it basically moves up the timeline of when they need to provide more water for Central Texas, which is why they've embarked on this water secure project. And they envision that the water secure project, if they have the funding and they start flowing, that they'll start providing water in to any of the users that might hook up to it by somewhere between 2032 and 2035. So it would be coming fairly quick. This is just another snapshot of that. They did hire an engineering firm called Black & Veatch that has already begun meeting with different communities across this path, has already developed some cost estimates on how much it might cost. And to no surprise, it's a very, very expensive project. And so all in all, they're estimating that it might cost somewhere between $5.6 billion to $5.8 billion to build this water line project. And so I'll repeat that, 5.6 billion to 5.8 billion to build this water line. Now, as I've mentioned, they have two geographic areas within their scope. They've got the lower basin area and then the mid basin area, which is really the area more in Central Texas. And so they did basically pull out the cost of building this infrastructure in the lower basin area, which is the LB, is what the LB stands for at the bottom of this, to kind of show us more or less what part of this capital expense is really more related to us, since we're more on the lower basin side of it. But even then, you're looking at $2.5 billion for that lower basin part of it. Now, how are they gonna fund this? They are basically, by the way, those are just some of the maps that Black & Veatch has put together as they've begun sort of trying to finalize exactly where the route of this pipeline is going to go. So it's a little bit more refined.
We're kind
But
of
you
at
get the gist. I'm sorry?
We're at the low end of the lower basin.
Yeah, basically, yes. But like anybody, right, when you're talking about financing something, right, you think about, well, getting a 30-year note, for example, right? Currently, under state law, you can't issue public debt for more than 30 years. However, they've ran scenarios that have that at 40 to 50 years to try and spread out the cost of that massive capital investment. In order to get any number above 30 years, they'd have to basically get some legislation passed at the next legislative session, which they intend to pursue that coming up. But just to kind of give you a sense of that, these costs here are per acre foot, which doesn't really mean anything. So I'll share a couple of other, cost estimates. So they reached out to us as part of the Black & Veatch effort and said, hey, if you were to be part of this, how much water do you think you might be interested in? And we basically got together, and kudos to the internal group, the City of Victoria team. The City of Victoria team included former Mayor Gary Middleton, who we've contracted with for years to be our main water guy, basically, right? He represents our interests on a variety of different boards, and he's been hugely critical in providing a lot of institutional knowledge and historical information on this matter to us. But it, of course, includes our city engineer, public works director, myself, CFO, the mayor. It's a really, really pretty neat group that has come together over the course of the last, 6 months, maybe, to look at this issue. And ultimately, we came up with a figure of 10 MGD and said, okay. And how we came up with 10 MGD was somewhat pretty straightforward, because our current surface water treatment plant is basically a 20 MGD plant, even though it can ramp up to closer to 23, 24 if we need it. And it was designed intentionally to account for an additional or a third 10 MGD basin to account for growth whenever we get to it. And we know that there's been some conversation around, or some concerns around, the availability of water flowing down the river, right? And so we thought, okay, if the master plan for the city accounted for an additional 10 MGD basin, let's just explore the 10 MGD coming from a different source, right? And so we presented 10 MGD to them. And ultimately, what they came back at was that our financial commitment for being a 10 MGD user of it looked as follows. Depending on where you landed on the 30 to 50-year financing option, it would necessitate anywhere between $14 to $18 million per year on our part, which would force utility rates to go up anywhere from 54% to 70%. And at the end of that life of that either 30 or 50 years, we would have been out of pocket ranging between 450 million to 736 million. It does, right? Yeah. So I say all that to convey that building out the community center is a very feasible project. But anyway, I know we're all laughing because it is humorous. In all seriousness, it's obviously a very cost prohibitive endeavor on our part. But I think it's important to be transparent with you on the real challenge associated with this project, which is the financial aspect of it. Now, there's a lot of other costs that aren't even baked into the numbers that I just described, which would only make these numbers that I've described even much more expensive, because those numbers don't include the fact that we would have to build a treatment facility to treat that raw water. They don't include any other infrastructure for the distribution of it, because we don't really even know where it would go. The cost of the water. So those costs don't even include the purchase price for the actual water. And they don't include the price that GBRA would charge any of their users, their pro rata share for the maintenance and operations of that line or that water. And so you can imagine how much more expensive it would be once you added those real costs to that. Now, to give you a sense of it, they have given us the option basically to explore any amount of water. And so just really quickly, what 5 MGD would look like would basically just be half of what I just described. It's pretty self-explanatory. Still a significant amount of money, but obviously not as much as the 10 MGD option. But you get the gist of where this is headed from a cost perspective. So where are we with this project? As I alluded to earlier, GBRA is on a very, very tight timeline because of when they basically need to provide water to Central Texas. And so they're literally this month have asked us, where does the city stand on this project? Because Black & Veatch, their engineering firm that they've hired, continues to develop cost scenarios and refine the route of the line basically to try and refine the numbers as much as possible. But obviously when you're looking at a figure that's over $5 billion, how much refinement can you actually achieve? So it's still obviously a very expensive project, but that's the question for us. And I do have a recommendation, but that's the question for us at this time from GBRA is, do we want to even continue to be in the conversation with them as they continue to explore this? Ultimately, I mentioned, they want to pursue some action at the next legislative session that would allow them to issue debt longer than the 30 years. And so they expect that Black & Veatch will have a more refined cost estimate of everything in February of 2025. And they basically would expect that any community that chooses to actually become a wholesale water customer of theirs in 2033 or 2035 literally sign a contract next fall. So these communities would literally be contractually committing buying an X amount of water from GBRA 10 years in advance of when that water would even be available to utilize for anything. Now, obviously, our situation here is completely different than that of Central Texas, where they need the water today, and obviously aren't slowing down with their rate of growth, right? And so our situation is completely different. But nonetheless, that's a timeline that GBRA is on. So you can imagine where that puts us in terms of, well, gosh, we really need to sort of make a decision, both informally and formally, around where we stand with this GBRA Water Secure project. And ultimately, what I think might make sense, even though the costs are still very unreasonable, I think it might make sense to still continue to have conversations, but significantly decrease the basically the figure, right? And so, like I said, this started with us telling GBRA that, hey, yes, sign us up. Let's assume that we are interested at 10 MGD. I'm proposing that we get back to them and tell them, you know what, that's too expensive for us. Put it down to 5 MGD, which is still very expensive, don't get me wrong. But at least keeps us with a seat at the table with GBRA as they continue to fine tune the cost estimates, as they continue to work with the legislature in the spring to even figure out what's going to happen. Part of why it might make sense to wait too, quite frankly, is because we know that there's going to be some efforts to maybe even ask the state legislature to tap into the rainy day fund or help fund this project through other means that would significantly decrease the capital expenditure from the different users along the line. And so until we gain some clarity and some certainty around whether they're actually going to issue $5 billion of debt or not, it might make sense for us to continue to have a seat at the table with GBRA until that gets figured out. And it looks like that will be figured out, in the spring, certainly by the end of the next legislative session. And I don't think we lose anything at this point to just continue to have a seat at the table, but be very intentional with our message that, hey, 10 MGG is just too cost prohibitive regardless of what you come up with. So let's bring that down to 5. And in the meantime, we did include in the VSTDC proposed budget, which was already adopted by VSTDC this past week, earlier this week, and will come before you soon, that we basically put out an RFQ to hire a specialized engineering firm that specializes in water to a greater degree than maybe we've hired in the past, to help us explore all of our options as it relates to additional water sources. Unlike Central Texas, we have options. Central Texas, for example, cannot access groundwater because of the aquifer situation over there. We technically could have access to groundwater that would need a lot of processing, but is technically there. We're technically closer to the Gulf, which could theoretically open opportunities for desalination projects in the future. You have the city of Corpus Christi that's undertaken. Literally, the city of Corpus Christi has undertaken a desalination project that's underway. And so there's options for us that don't exist for Central Texas communities that it might make sense for us to hire a firm to help us fully figure out how much those options would cost. Because, again, if ultimately what GBRA is suggesting, if ultimately what GBRA is suggesting, even at the 5 MGD option, is that we would be out of pocket $227 million to $370 million, over that 30 to 50 year period, we can do a lot, with that money, and probably do a lot with much less of that money in exploring some additional options. I mean, a desalination plant, for example, would cost less than that. And so I think it's important that we, hire somebody to help us figure that out. Fortunately for us, there's pros and cons to not growing super quick. And so one of the pros of not growing super quick as a community, population-wise, is that we don't have that pressure that other communities have to necessarily figure this out by the end of next calendar year. And so we have some flexibility as it relates to that. And so with that, I'm happy to answer any questions or address any concerns. Simply wanted to provide you in this public setting an update on where things stand with GBRA.
Sounds like people need to stop moving where water's not.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because a lot of communities up in that area are stopping growth because there's no water.
Yeah, we're trying to, yeah.
Yeah, trying to. We should always keep a seat at the table. According to Glenn Hager, there's a surplus over the rainy day fund, and a lot of money is going to be put back into the general fund for the state. And I know that they want to fund water projects. We should always keep a seat at the table, but this is outrageous amount of money.
I will say, given the scope of this project, I think we all knew that the numbers are going to be staggering, for the cost. But agree with Mr. Lofgren from the standpoint that given all the unknowns that surround this particular project, it makes sense just to, kind of keep our seat at the table, so to speak, and monitor what happens and see what it looks like. One thing I will say that certainly I'm thankful for our predecessors who put us in a position that we do have a good water supply right now, or, that we have the supply that we have. And it makes sense, through this process that you talked about, to focus some resources on how do we maximize what we have? How can we better utilize what we can get our hands on? And are there other options even beyond that that aren't, these ridiculous numbers? So I think your recommendations, at least in my mind, make a lot of sense, given what we know and given what we don't know right now.
Right. And one thing too, your comment made me think of it, is that whatever strategy we come up with, should be tied to our own pace of growth, right? And that wouldn't be the case under this program, because now technically the figures that I shared with you, we wouldn't be on the hook for until the project actually is online, but we would obviously have to build up to it, right? And the reality is that our current setup, just to be clear, we're in good shape. We don't feel the pressure of, needing to build the other 10 MGD basin, for example, next year. And so even tapping into this water in 2035, we technically, even then, assuming something that we don't know happens and we all of a sudden grow very quickly, we technically wouldn't even need that 5 MGD or 10 MGD in 2035, because our pace of growth wouldn't even demand it at that time. But it would have been one of those things where it's like, well, gosh, we don't want to miss the opportunity to tap into this if it comes up, since the pipeline would pass right by us, right? But anywho.
Very good. Thank you. Anything else? Go
I
ahead.
just wanted to ask how quickly or what the timeline would look like on getting the additional options that would be available to us when we
Great question.
put out that RFQ.
Yeah, so we anticipate putting out that RFQ literally in the next few months is the goal. And not knowing what we don't know, since we've never really hired a firm to look at this to this perspective as we're wanting to, we don't know how long it would take that firm to develop those options. Is it going to take them 6 months? Is it going to take them a year? We don't really have a good sense of that at this point, to be honest with you. But we're hoping to put out the RFQ, this fall. Hopefully have somebody engaged and bringing the contract to you, winter or spring, and then kind of proceed with it.
Very good.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Mr. Garza. It appears that we've reached the end of our agenda, so.
And whoever picked the over.
Yeah. There we go. All right. Well, with that then, we are adjourned.